Welcome everyone, Kelly here from A Bit Above Average MTB, and today we are going to talk about buying a used mountain bike, so stay tuned. So obviously buying a used mountain bike can, be a bit of a concern obviously. So, being the nature of the sport, obviously the bike can take a serious beating, maybe it doesn't. Not everyone takes care of their stuff great, but some people do. So, there still is some good deals to be had out there. If you know what you're doing and you're going to spend the time to look around, you can find yourself a nice deal on a used bike. All right, so we're gonna get ready to purchase a bike. So obviously the first thing you're gonna do, you're gonna know what this is right away. Set your budget. See what kind of money that you have to spend. And then from there, you're gonna wanna go to the places where you can find used bikes. So obviously, Pink Bike's obviously probably number one places that you can use. Obviously Facebook groups and just, local friends and all that kind of stuff. So set your budget and then start looking for bikes. So once you've keyed in on a handful of bikes that you may be interested in, you probably definitely, I would say, check some online reviews. Obviously, the past 10 or so or more years, there's going to be plenty of online reviews virtually about every single bike out there. So search through those, see what the reviewers had to say, do a little bit of research about those bikes. That way you can familiarize yourself a little bit with that bike and how it rode in that time, and just basically see how they stack up against each other, put them all together, and see how that works out. So one of the things that you may need to learn a little bit about, which you may or may not know, obviously if you know, great, but if you don't, understanding the level of components. So, knowing the difference between, an SLX and an XTR. Obviously, so you look at a bike and, depending on the level of components, obviously the cost goes into that. So, that way at least you're comparing apples to apples, oranges to oranges, and everything, everything is all equal. So, if you don't know that, hopefully you have some mountain biking friends that can, hopefully explain that to you. So me personally, I would rather have a used bike with top level components than a newer bike with low level components. Obviously the lower level stuff is just not going to be, as durable, and the quality is just not as good, obviously. So that's my opinion about that. So I would definitely try to stick with that if you can. So something with higher level, but used obviously than new. One of the very first things that you should do, most definitely, you're gonna want to flip the bike over, and right underneath the bottom bracket right here, you're going to find the identification number. You can take that and you can run that through multiple places. There is a place called a website, Project 529. They've been building up an online database of stolen bikes and serial numbers. You can check there. You can most definitely check with your local police department to see if there's anything there, and you can most definitely also check like local forums and that kind of stuff, see if anything pops up there with bikes of the similar brand or type that may or may not have been stolen. So yeah, number one, check if the bike is stolen. Alrighty, so we got most of that main stuff out of the way. So, we have a budget, we've checked that it's not stolen, we've done some reviews, we've compared some bikes, and we're gonna actually physically go and look at a bike. So let's go over some of the things, obviously, that you're gonna wanna check for right away to try to, determine, the quality and the wear level and, just the overall feel of the bike, and, let's go from there. All right, so we're at the bike. Obviously, we're ready to start inspecting it. Obviously, depending if it's aluminum or carbon. Unfortunately, the carbon bikes a little bit harder to inspect. They can hide cracks a little bit easier and that kind of stuff. Aluminum bikes, it's pretty obvious, I would think. You're gonna want to check, basically like where the head tube goes, any of the welds that you can see, any of the main structural pieces that you can see. Seat. The seat stay, or we want to go down. Obviously we're going to check down, obviously anywhere the welds, anything along the chain stay here as well. Basically just anywhere that you can, try to give it a real good look over, and identify, obviously if you can see any kinds of cracks. Generally, if a bike looks like it's in decent condition, it probably hasn't lived too hard of a life. Obviously, if it has just tons of, just really beaten up, then you might have a little bit of level of concern. You might want to look a little bit closer, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's a bad bike. Don't want to give any beginners a hard time, but, beginners do maybe a little bit harder on the bike, in the visual aspect of it, but it probably hasn't been sent off any 50-foot drops or jumps, or you know what I mean, like rampage type stuff. Obviously, I mean, it probably hasn't lived that hard of a life. So even though it may be scuffed and show a lot of wear and tear on it, that doesn't necessarily mean that it is a bad bike. So look closely, see what you can see. So next, as we check the frame, obviously we've checked that it's not cracked and that kind of stuff, nothing major there. You're going to want to really check into all the bearings and whatnot. So really try and give it a good push. Put your fingers over top of the bushings here, or the bearings, and work it back and forth, and see if you can feel any kind of movement on the back and forth. Sometimes you may not sit on it, just give it a quick push, you might not quite feel it. Really get your fingers over top of the joints and feel what's happening right in there. Same thing with the lower, get in there and really feel it. Try and you can even kind of like push on the chainstay, pull up on the frame, and sort of just feel it. If you feel anything in there, and really work it, and just make sure that you have no play there. So the one thing that I would highly suggest too is do the research on that bike and make sure it is not a bushing, a bike that has bushings instead of bearings. Some bikes were doing that a few years back, and it really was not a good thing. They definitely wore out. I mean, I had a bad experience myself even. Some people might remember the Banshee Spitfire. It was a great bike at the time, it rode good, but the bushings just wore out all the time. So such a nuisance, something you probably don't want to get into. So bearings, they do eventually wear out. It's definitely not a deal breaker, but it is a cost that you may incur if you're if you're going to find that there is some wear there. So at least that way you have the knowledge and you can use that to your power. So a good inspection is definitely, or a good inspection on the bearings is definitely key there. So make sure you check out all the pivots and bearings and make sure that they're in great shape. So we're just starting to get into this inspection here, and I just want to take a quick second and ask you, if you're finding any of this useful and entertaining, please consider hitting the like button and also subscribing to the channel. Help keep the stoke high, and yeah, you're gonna keep producing some, hopefully some great content for you all to watch. So thanks so much. So hopefully the bike that you're looking at has a dropper post. I mean, if you've never had one of these, or you're new to riding and same thing, you're not really sure what this is. I mean, it's a remote lever seat tube that adjusts up and down. I mean, this is an absolute game changer if you've never had one, and you're going to want to make sure that it works properly. Over time they do need to be serviced, and basically you press the button and they're slow, or you press the button and they don't want to go down, so you're going to want to make sure you check all that out. Obviously you can check here for leaking, and basically the lever and some of the tube, make sure none of that's leaking as well. You can look for wear on this post here, make sure there's no scratches or serious wear showing there. So make sure that that is up and running, and not going to fail anytime soon for you. So one of the next things we're definitely going to want to check out is the rear wheel and hub. So they can definitely get beat up, so you're going to lift the bike off the ground here, and you're going to kind of move it laterally like this way. Make sure that there's no play in that hub. If you notice any wear here or anything side to side movement, you're definitely into some hub troubles there. Next thing you want to do is pick it up and pedal the bike, and you can see here this wheel is definitely true. Obviously we're looking for some serious wobbles there. You can go through as well and check all the spoke tension. Make sure that none of these are falling apart or broken even. You'll tell if one's really soft. So this wheel is still in good shape, still runs nice and true. So and you can do basically the exact same test for the front wheel. Just give it a good spin and make sure there's nothing going on there as well. So something to consider too, obviously we want to check the tire type. If you're not familiar with tires, I mean, obviously kind of a controversial topic, but some of the popular brands out there, Maxxis, Kenda, Michelin, Schwalbe, so these are some of the top names in tires. I would say Maxxis is definitely probably the top. So besides checking that it actually has not worn out tires, is actually checking what brand they are, and are they a good brand. So, and then while you're inspecting the tires, one of the tips you're going to want to look for is usually right along the outside edge. A lot of these knobs, even if these knobs do look good, you'll see cracking in here. So basically they're starting to come apart, and you know, that's not a good sign as well. So it may show that the tires might be, you know, still in a reasonable condition, but they're very old. So what happens is the rubber starts to deteriorate over time, and it can start cracking, and you know, some of these knobs can actually even start falling off. So even if they're in good shape, but they're old, that's not a good sign actually. That may be a point where you want to consider actually replacing the tires. So make sure you check that as well. So while we're at the front, obviously, you know, we want to give the fork a really good inspection. You know, we're going to want to check out you know, the stanchion here and make sure there's not any deep scratches or anything like that. Obviously that the seal is sealing. We don't have any fresh fluid or anything like that. You know, I wouldn't be too worried about external scuffing on the outside. I mean, it's visual, but I mean, it's not going to cause any performance problems. So make sure you're doing that. Yeah, and what you can do is you can have the bike up, and you know, obviously push on it, and you know, even bounce it a little bit. See if there's any, like, a top out feeling, if it's going, you know, basically bong bong, like when it comes apart. You know, maybe we'll try that again. Bong bong, everyone likes that. Bong bong bong. So while we're checking the front fork, we can basically just apply the front brake, and you know, we can give it a good push down like that, and then like I said, you know, we can bounce it off the ground like this and feel you know, if there's anything going on the fork. While we're checking that, we can apply the front brake and put our hand on the headset here and basically rock the bike back and forth. You can kind of feel if there's any play in the headset, or turn the wheel this way and load the handlebars. Basically, I'm taking the handlebars and I'm rocking them like this. So, you know, load that back and forth and see if there's any play in there as well. So I didn't specifically mention it before, but obviously when we're checking out the frame, we want to do basically the same sort of inspection with the rear shock. Obviously when we're checking the frame bushings, we can check for play in the shock bushings. Those actually aren't that big of a deal to replace. They do commonly wear out, the D bushing, I believe it's called. You know, so that is not the end of the world, but you want to make sure that it's coming from the bushing and not the frame, or from the shock inside. Obviously looking for, you know, making sure that there's no signs of leaking in and around the seal basically here, or accumulating anything in that area. Obviously that would be a concern, because you know, you do have to service your suspension, and you know, neglecting that, you know, can make it component wear out prematurely, or you know, just in general fail. So you know, make sure you're going to check that out. Like I mentioned earlier, so knowing the components that are on the bike, obviously, you know, do we have an aluminum or a carbon bar, the type of stem, you know, the type of brakes, you know, you need to know these kind of things so you can price the bike accordingly, and knowing you know, if you're getting yourself a good or a bad deal. So it is key to do your research there. So we do want to check how the brakes feel. Obviously, you know, give them a good squeeze, sort of see, maybe hold them down and see if you know, the lever starts to sink or anything like that. You know, making sure that you know, none of that happens. Obviously you're going to do a parking lot test. You know, you can check the performance of them and making sure that they're grabbing there. So yeah, you definitely want to check that. So something that we can do for the front and the rear wheels is when we're checking basically our brakes down there, is we can, you know, have the wheel off the ground and spin it and look to see, or even listen actually, to see if that rotor is going, you know, rubbing badly, or if it's only rubbing half of the way, basically like basically doing something like that. You know, it's going to identify that, you know, potentially we have a bent rotor, and that may become a problem over some time. You can also, you know, sneak down in there and look and identify and see how much pad level is left there. So drivetrain, you know, is definitely something you're going to want to check into. Can be a little bit tricky to know if it's a great drivetrain, you know, without spending a lot of time on the trail. Hopefully you can take it out for a good parking lot ride, you know, put it in, you know, basically harder gear and give it a good pedal, you know, shift it up and down through the gears. You can do that by hand, obviously, just picking it up and, you know, running it through the gears. But you know, you're definitely going to want to look. I mean, have a good look at the the front chain ring, you know, look for, you know, obviously bent or broken teeth. You can do the same thing on the cassette. You typically, obviously, the largest one will get the most wear, because that's where you get into the climbing gears. So make sure you're doing that. Shift it up and down the gears. You know, you can make sure the clutch works on the derailleur, and give it a good inspection there. So inside the bottom bracket here, we have, you know, we have these bearings, right? The bottom bracket bearings here. We're going to want to check that those are good. You can kind of grab the pedals here and sort of load it up and down and go like this and move it, basically rocking it, trying to rock it. You can definitely feel that too when you're on the bike. You want to make sure that there's no play in there. Sometimes even the arms here will get wear in here. You can kind of feel that when you're trying to rock it back and forth. Definitely something you want to make sure. Typically these BBs, you know, under load or climbing, sometimes they creak or make these kinds of noises. So do your best to try and load it up in the parking lot and give it a good, you know, a good crank there, and make sure that there's nothing going on there as well. So let's talk about pedals here real quick. Obviously, it's one of these things that, you know, to me is sort of just a wearable component. Even if you get a new bike, I mean, you know, you consider just throwing these ones away and getting some new ones. But the key things that you're going to want to check if you don't want to buy pedals right away, obviously, the outside I'm not too worried about. Basically, all pedals end up by looking sort of like this. I mean, over time, they get beat up. But you're going to want to check, you know, pin condition and how many are, you know, missing or broken off, you know, that kind of thing. So and probably the only thing that you can check here is for, you know, bushing or play wear. You know, give them a spin. Do they sound, you know, terrible? Obviously, like if they make some crazy noises, you know. But yeah, if they're not too bad, I mean, you can rebuild them. Sometimes it's not really even worth it. You're just better off just to buy a new set of pedals. But yeah, sometimes even just taking them apart and giving them a service and some fresh grease will and some new pins will definitely just bring life right back into them. So yeah, anyways. So take your time, look around. I mean, there is people out there who really do take care of their stuff. You know, I happen to be one of them. You know, I obviously really try to like maintain, wash, service, make sure my bikes are running tip top. So, you know, you're going to find both of there. You're going to find people that just completely neglect everything and don't do a damn thing. So, you know, those are the ones we're trying to avoid. So take the time, have a look around. So I really hope this video helps someone out. You know, I'd hate to see someone get stuck with something, some repair bills. Hopefully maybe save you some money or save you from buying, you know, the wrong POS. You know, just want to see everyone out there riding, and you know, until next time, see you on the trails, and thanks for hanging out.